All right, guys, welcome to the first episode of our new series called Free People. And no, I know you guys might be thinking this, most likely the ladies are thinking this. This is not a series about the amazing store called Free People with their cute clothes. This is actually a series about rules. And when I say the word rules, I'm sure there can be a mixed amount of emotions, but if we're talking openly and honestly here, when people think about Christianity, when people think about God, when people think about religion, I think more often than not, we think about a list of rules, a set of expectations that we have to meet in order to be deemed righteous, in order to be deemed worthy, in order to be deemed a good person. And I think that thought, I think that expectation, I think that view of faith can kind of put a sour taste in our mouth, because regardless or not of how we respond to rules or how we view rules, they're not always fun to follow. Rules are something that can feel restricting, and I'm sure all of you have experienced a rule, whether it's from your school, whether it's from your parent, even whether it's from your church, that has been frustrating for you to follow. But you see, in this series, I want us to be really intentional about looking at what kind of rules does God actually call us to? What kind of relationship are we supposed to have with those rules? How should it affect the way we live? And why do they matter? You see, I've really never been somebody who likes to follow the rules, but yet always have been at the same time. I don't like getting in trouble, but I also don't like being told what to do. And I don't know if you feel the same way as me, and I really kind of struggled with it a little bit in high school. You see, my parents had a list of rules, of things we were supposed to do. And what was interesting about those rules, while I found them frustrating, I understand them better now, but the two big ones was we always had to tell our parents where we were, and we always had to be home by curfew. And I hated the rule of being home by curfew. Like, a lot of my friends lived far away, like 30 minutes away, and so being home by midnight just wasn't fun for me, because I felt like I always had to leave earlier than everyone else. And you know what? I would wait as long as I possibly could. As long as I possibly could before I would leave my friend's house to get home, to live by that rule. But in order to do that, I would have to break a lot more rules, because you see, I would be speeding home and maybe driving recklessly just so that when I drove home, I could get there before midnight, because my dad would wait up until my car was in the garage. And I hated that rule. But I think having that rule and having a lot of the rules my parents set for us did influence the way I lived. And the older I got, the more I understood them. But I think I didn't truly understand them until I got older, and I really started to focus on what the consequences of choices are, what the value of rules have in our lives, and why there are rules. And I first want to look at, why do we look at faith as something as a list of rules? And that's because for a long time it was. You see, before Jesus came, when we are in the Old Testament, there are hundreds upon hundreds of rules, very intricate rules that Jewish people were supposed to follow in order to be holy, in order to reconnect with God, in order to kind of pay for their sins, and they were intricate. Rules that if you read through today, you would say seem trivial, seem pointless. You don't understand why these rules are in place, but these rules were necessary, and people would abide by them, live by them, shape their lives around them, because it needed to happen in order for a relationship with God. But you see, when Jesus showed up, things changed. The rules changed. And I think sometimes we can forget that. Sometimes we can look at what faith was. We can look at those lists of rules in the Bible, and we can forget how things changed with Jesus, and we can decide, I don't want to be living by these lists of rules, instead of focusing on the actual values that these rules tell us. Not all of them, but the ones that Jesus calls us to. And so in this series, we are actually going to be diving into one of my favorite books in the Bible. One, I love this book because it's fairly short. It's only 5 chapters, but I am all about application. I'm someone who loves clarity on how to move forward, what to do, and what that means. And James is essentially a book that dives into how we live out our faith. What kind of roles, what kind of rules do we live by, and why they matter? And so we are going to be diving into this book and figuring out what it means. But what you need to understand is James was written by Jesus' brother. And Jesus' brother James ended up being the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and he led over a congregation of Jewish people who turned to Christianity. And what he's addressing in this book is the fact that the Jewish people had lived their entire lives by their rules, by the rules that God had set for them in the Old Testament. And then James is trying to help them understand the new rules, the new value in these rules, and ultimately the freedom that can come from these rules. And so I want us to look at James 1 verses 22 through 25, because I think James kind of sets the tone and sets the sets the table for how we're supposed to be looking at these rules. And I want us to dive into that together today. And here's what it says. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. You see what James is saying here in these verses and what he's trying to encourage these people to understand, what he's trying to encourage us to understand is these rules matter. And it's the rules that we read in the Bible. It's the way God calls us to live. To read the scripture, to understand what God is saying to us and to not turn away and forget it, but to leave the Bible after we've done reading it and go and live it out. But I think what's so important is how James talks about how if we are people that don't live by these rules, that don't read the Bible and apply it to our life, we're like somebody who looks in the mirror. And as soon as we turn away, we forget what we look like. Because you see, what matters about these rules, the rules we are going to dive into over these next few weeks, is these are rules that shape who God has called us to be. These are rules that shape the way we live. And if we don't live by them, if we forget to live by them, we're ultimately forgetting who we are, forgetting who we were called to be, losing sight of how God has uniquely made each and every one of us. And so James is challenging these people to not look at these rules and look at them saying, I will accomplish this rule and therefore I'm a good person, and I will accomplish this rule, and therefore I'm holy. Because when you have that view, you place more importance on the set of rules than the relationship you have with God. And that's not good. And then you place more importance on the authority you can gain or the righteousness you can gain by following these rules than by living well with God. And James doesn't want that for the Jewish people in Jerusalem, and he doesn't want that for us. He's challenging us to look at these rules, look at how Jesus changed everything. Jesus changed the rules of how we're supposed to live. And the first and foremost is understanding that when Jesus came down and died for us and gave his life for us, nothing can take our salvation from us. It's not a list of rules. No. Jesus loved us, and we are loved whether we follow those specific, intense rules or whether we do not. You see, our relationship with God was restored, so we no longer have to live by these rules in the fear of whether or not we are deeming ourselves a good person, because we have already been deemed loved and valued and cared for, and so we no longer need to worry about that. And if we no longer need to worry about our worth or our salvation or whether or not we are loved or good enough, then what do these rules say? Why do these rules matter? And I think it's important to understand. And so I want to look at Matthew 22 verses 35 through 40, because I think Jesus in these verses, this is where we see him start to change the rules. This is where we see him give us rules that I want to focus on today. The first rule that truly matters. And here's what you need to know In these verses, Jesus is addressing the Pharisees. And Pharisees are people that lived by the law, lived by religious law, lived by those rules. And so they thought they could trap Jesus in testing him of what he knew about religious law. But instead, Jesus changed the law. He simplified it. He helped point it towards what it actually was about now that he was there, now that relationships would be restored. And this is what it says. It's Matthew 22, verses 35 through 40. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." So that's the law I want us to focus on today. You see, we no longer have to be consumed by specific laws that can sometimes even be trivial to earn our salvation, because that salvation is earned. But now instead we live with laws that help glorify God, that help build our relationship with him. And that's the law of love. And we live in the law of love, and we pursue it, and we pursue God by it and his calling for us. We can find more freedom to be ourselves and who we are. You see, my parents had a set of rules for me and my siblings when we were in high school. And while I found those rules tedious and annoying, the truth is I started to really appreciate those rules, because I found that the more and more I lived by those rules, the more and more I told my parents where I was and that I got home by curfew, I found the more and more freedom I had. Because I was developing a relationship of trust with me and my parents, and because I was getting to know them better and what they cared about and what they valued in those rules. But then as I lived by those rules, they started to understand my character and how I lived and what I valued, and we were able to live more in harmony. You see, I started to value those rules more deeply because I found valuing those rules and living by those rules, like showing up before curfew and always telling my parents where I was, gave me more freedom to live my life than if I chose to forsake those rules, chose to fight against my parents and to cause drama. I found my life was filled with more peace and harmony. But you see, I also had to start to understand, and it was slow to understand, the rule of love. You see, following rules in our lives are not fun. But if we live by the rule of love that God has called us to, then what we need to understand is that we are called to look at what is in front of us, look at the expectations that are set, look at the rules that our parents place before us, that our schools place before us, and ask, how do we love well in that? How do we love God well with how we respond to rules, with how we live? And how do we love others well too? You see, I may not have done this well in high school, but I can look back on it now and said, if I had been living by the rule of love, I would have been looking at my rule of my curfew and wondering, how do I love my dad well in that, where I can show up and he doesn't have to wait for me to come home? You see, I would risk getting home or leaving to get home on time as long as I could, and I almost never got home on time. But you see, every time I finally got home, my dad was up waiting for me. And I really appreciate that about him, and I think it shows how much he loved me, but how much did I show that I loved him and making him wait? And pushing the boundaries of my curfew just so I could have a little more time with my friends. And if I'm honest with you, those 10 extra minutes didn't add too much to the experience. Or how could I have loved better by following my curfew so that I didn't drive so recklessly and maybe potentially put myself in danger, my sister in danger who was in the car, or others? And I think that's a small way to look at it, but it's like, how do we look at every rule in our life, whether it's rules of curfew or expectations or school or relationships, and ask ourselves, how do I love God in this? How do I honor him? How do I honor who he has called me to be in these situations? And then how do I love others well too? And I know that is a big thing to think through because rules can get so tedious, guys. But I want you to understand that the more we live by the rule of love, of seeking to love God with what we do, to love others with what we do, I think we find more peace. We find more harmony. We start to find more opportunities to add value, to add relationship, to add community, even in the smallest ways. And so I want you to be thinking about that. I want you to be thinking about where in your life are you maybe not living by the rule of love? Where in your life are you maybe not valuing others and not valuing God? And in the end, it's not only causing others chaos, but it's causing yourself chaos. It's pulling you away from God, because you see, we seem to think that all these rules are strangling us, are trapping us. But the thing is, we need to figure out how to recognize what are the right rules in our life. What are the rules that are important? What are the rules that set boundaries, that call us to live well? It's okay to question. It's okay to challenge. But the act of defiance, just for the sake of defiance, doesn't always mean it's healthy. Some rules are in place because they protect us. Some rules are in place because they protect others. Some rules are there because they can actually help bring out harmony or help glorify God and bring love into our community, into our family, into our spaces. But we need to recognize what those rules are. We need to challenge ourselves to follow the rules that matter. To understand that some rules are good. Some rules are good. What are those rules? And how do you apply the rule of love that God has placed in your life so that you can better glorify him, that you can be more aware of yourself and not read the Bible and come to church on Sunday and hear how you are called to live, but as soon as Monday comes, you forget. But instead, you be the same person that God calls you to be each and every day, because you've chosen to apply a certain set of rules to your life that remind you of who God says you are, remind you of who you are called to be. And so guys, let's start today with the rule of love. So I want you to go into small groups and be talking about, what does that mean? What does the rule of love mean to you? What are some good rules and boundaries in your life, and what are some bad ones? What are some ones that you need to lean into more, and what are some ones that you might need to figure out how to let go of? But first and foremost, be asking yourself in all of those things, how in these rules, how in these things I'm choosing to live by, the standards that set my actions, the standards that influence how I act, what I say, what I do, are they ones that reflect how much I love God and how much I love others? All right, guys. I know this is a big topic, and I hope you can have a great small group starting to decipher what this means. And we're going to be spending the next few weeks really talking about what it looks like to have a different view of rules and to apply them to your life. But stay tuned for announcements, and then enjoy small group. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Impact News. What? We got all the info that you need today to enjoy Impact. Isn't that right?
Correct.
All right.
Including how the weather's doing down here.
Oh,
as you can tell by my stylish hoodie, it's cold, but we persevere.
It sounds terrible. It's freezing here.
Yeah, well, you guys got snow, so I'm not complaining.
I mean, the snow's pretty, but now I'm like kind of tired of it, and I'm just cold. But it is what it is. All right, guys, we have 2 announcements for you. What is the first one?
First one is about Bible study. We continue with Galatians. We'll be finishing up that series this week, 7 o'clock on Wednesday at South Lake. Please be there.
Yes, bring
your Bible.
Bring a mask. You can bring your Bible on your phone. You don't have to have an actual Bible there. I will not judge you for a technology efficient Bible. But then also, guys, I want you to be aware of something that is coming up in a month, and that is we are going to do a special impact on February 28th called Spiritual Gifts class. And what this whole thing is going to be about is spiritual gifts, and more specifically, what your spiritual gifts are. And so we're going to be talking about spiritual gifts. We're going to be talking about your spiritual gifts, and we actually have a quiz that you guys can take in this next month to prepare for this impact so that you can be aware of what spiritual gifts you might have and what it looks like to start cultivating them. And so in order to get that quiz, you need to give your small group leader your email, and then I will be able to send the quiz to you. So that's a lot of info, but it's something I am super excited about. I can't wait to talk about this stuff with you guys. I think it's fun.
It is fun. I took the quiz. It's easy, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the answers. It's uplifting at the very least, but encouraging and insightful. So please do it.
Exactly. So you guys got a month to prepare, but you need the quiz. So make sure you give your leaders your email. And I think that's all we have for you guys today. Is that right?
That's it.
Ooh, awesome. All right, guys. Well, you can head to small group and enjoy the rest of your day. This has been Impact News, and I'm Ronnie.
And I'm Chip. Signing off.
Yes. All right, guys. Have a good one.